I see it now. That's it. Yeah, I've got it. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit of the story, because I guess the work we did initially with OfCourseMe predates you being on board as well, Adam. So it might be useful to just give a little bit of background as to how that came about. We were going through quite a big transformation project in Vodafone in the learning space. So not only were we looking at changing the back-end LMS, but we were also building a single learner experience platform in order to consolidate all the different platforms that we had across the business. And we had all of our functions, all of our different markets across the globe, all working a little bit disparately in the way that they were accessing learning. So we made a real commitment to pull everything together and to give Vodafone a one-stop shop for learning. Now, the work we did was great. You know, we built this thing called Vodafone University, and it was very well received. The challenge that we had was, as part of our continuous improvement process, we were very open about the fact that this platform was for our employees, for our learners, and for our L&D teams. And we wanted them to give us lots and lots of feedback and suggestions for improvement. And we then looked at those on their merits, built a backlog, you know, in a very agile type of way. And whereas it was very well received, we still heard this feedback saying, look, it's great, but it feels like a corporate portal. It feels like everything that's on there is Vodafone specific content. And if we're interested in anything else, anything that we want to personally go and discover, we're having to use Google. So that resonated loud and clear, because, you know, Google's fine, but it means we've got absolutely no control or any kind of reassurance that the content they're finding is of good value. So two big objectives came out for us. One was we wanted to find someone who could really help us in curating this external world. And secondly, how we could have a seamless interface. So we promised one way of working for people. How can we ensure we deliver against that? And that's when we started talking with OfCourseMe. So we'd already had our Italian market doing some great work with them. And we sat down, and I think one of the things that immediately impressed me was just the alignment on the strategic vision. So it wasn't a case of here's a solution, good luck. It was really, OfCourseMe, trying to understand what we were looking to achieve from this and how best they could partner with us to do it. And the result of that, after the two teams came together, is that we then delivered an environment which our learners could go in and type it into the search bar for a piece of content, and they'd be presented with side-by-side external content and internal content. And it just meant we provided that seamless experience, but we now had a wealth of external content and the reassurance that that content was not only curated with high quality, but it was also dynamically updated. So there was no risk of outdated links or dead links that people were going to. So that was a hugely successful and well-received piece of work. And just to sort of finish on that, I think, you know, you see the real value of these kind of partnerships in adversity. And like most people, when we went into COVID, we started to think, you know, what can we do? We're asking our employees to now work from home. They're going to be having families and kids, you know, not at schools, not at universities. Is there something we can do to support them? And we talked to a number of our suppliers and solution providers. And of course, we came back and, you know, they've worked with us to build a temporary additional platform, which has meant that family can get access to some of the content, they can continue to learn, and it's really been appreciated as a supportive element that we've given to our employees above and beyond what we normally provide. So, you know, in summary, I think, and the slide talks to it, you know, here I've pulled out a few of the things that Vodafone and OfCourseMe delivered, and the single solution, we said, seamless integration, dynamic curation. But the things that really stood out for me was the strategic alignment and the fact that, of course, we were interested in what we were doing, and we're still continuing to talk now, or Vodafone and of course we're still talking now about analytics and how can you bring the real value of analytics into the collective world. And this perception that no longer of course, we're seen as a supplier, but they're seen as a valued partner. So long answer, Adam, but I hope that gives you a really good overview of the partnership we've had.
Amazing, very detailed. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, and to echo what you said there, you know, it's been great news with us, that partnership, and long may it continue. Happy to see the slides are working as well, Nick. So that panics.
Yeah, that's always a plus.
Brilliant. So on to question 2 then. I mean, you left Vodafone in March, in the cusp of all these things. I know I joined OfCourseMe on the cusp of Corona as well. But tell me about your new venture. What's going on?
Yeah, sure. So I actually left Vodafone on the 31st of March, which was 1 week into lockdown. And
Right.
Some people say there's never an ideal time to leave, but you'd question whether that was actually a sensible time at all. But it is what it is. You can't change it. Out of adversity comes opportunity sometimes. And for me, the important thing was that I had an ambition, and the ambition was to build more flexibility into the way I work. And one of the reasons for that is that I have a personal purpose that I also wanted to fulfill, and it gave me an opportunity to be able to sort of spend more time doing that. So I've tried to keep very focused on my purpose in doing it. And one of the things that's very easy to do when you step off the platform with a corporate business is suddenly to think, I need everything and anything that people offer me as work. And there's something to be said for that, especially in a pandemic, to try and make sure that you can secure something. But you also, if you've taken the step to get that freedom and that flexibility, you also need to keep clear on what your purpose is, because otherwise you're stepping from one very noisy environment into another very noisy environment. So my passion in terms of what I wanted to achieve was, and again, it plays to this word partnership. So I don't want to go in and do 6-month contracts and things like that with businesses, but I really want to take the value of the experience I've got in being able to partner with the teams and the organizations that I have, and start to work with a small number of clients to be able to help them overcome some of the same challenges. So I've kept flexible, I've kept adaptive in the way that I've done it. And I think sort of on reflection now, a few months down the line, Adam, I'd say the approach to how I'm doing this partnership hasn't changed a great deal, but the nature of some of the discussions has, I guess, so it's not some of the sort of visioning strategic discussions that we would have had otherwise. But what really is encouraging, that I think over the last 4 months or so, I feel that conversations are moving away from purely being recovery focused to being more discovery. So what now can we do in this new world? What is the opportunity for L&D? And how can we really grasp that and be able to sort of have a different mindset in how we approach it? And that's something that I'm really keen to sort of try and work with a number of businesses to overcome. Brilliant.
Well, as you already know, Nick, I'm fully behind what you're doing, and that passion you're chasing as well. I mean, it's all really interesting to me, but I think what would be a great question for this then is, what observations based on those discussions are you having, or have you had to this date, really? What are you finding?
Yeah, it's really interesting that I think a lot of people are reflecting on the fact that they've faced challenges in the past, but what they're facing now is quite unprecedented. So it's a whole new way of having to sort of think about what they do and how they respond to some of the challenges that they're facing. But as I say, it also feels now that the language is changing a bit to where people are seeing that as an opportunity. And there's businesses are starting to think about, how do they organize in this new world, and how do they operate in this new world? And I think there's a realization that, look, we went sort of one direction into an almost virtual world with lockdown, and we've been there or thereabouts since that happened. But hopefully, really hopefully, with the vaccines and everything else, we're going to get to a point that we can remove some of these restrictions. But I don't think we're going to ever go back to where we were in February. I think it's going to be, a slightly more hybrid world. And within that, businesses need to be agile and flexible to think about, what does that actually mean for them? So they're thinking about, how do they operate? They're thinking about, what organization do they need in place? Is it, how much of it needs to be physical? How much of it needs to be virtual? And I think most importantly, what skills do they need in that business?
Yeah.
So a lot of companies were doing work on reskilling and upskilling prior to the COVID pandemic, but I think now there's also a challenge in terms of, are there new skills that we're going to need? So people are having to behave in quite a different world to the one they did before. There's a bit more emphasis on empathy around leadership and things like that. So whereas we've still got some very core functional skills, I think some of the, personally, some of the skills that are going to go around that are going to be fairly different in the way that we lead and we run our businesses. So for me, there's a big opportunity there, and I keep using this opportunity word, but I think it's time that the L&D guys can actually sit with their senior leadership teams and actually say, we're really well positioned to help you do this. We're all about building capability. We're all about building and interventions to help with the gaps that you've got. So how can we become that valued partner moving forward?
Most definitely, some really good points there. And just to reiterate, a lot of what I'm hearing as well, Nick, from conversations, definitely, over the past 3 months, especially. So then the next question for me then would be, what's some examples of these skills and behaviours? How would you be looking to support through your partnership? What can you bring to the table?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, my business model, to be honest with you, Adam, has changed 3 or 4 times since I left Vodafone in thinking about how I'd position this.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm doing that is, again, it goes back to this thing of being a valued partner, right? So I can have my own agenda and I can try and force that agenda forward and say, there's some great things you guys need to work with me on. But if it's not the right time and if it's not addressing the issues that are keeping them awake, there's precious little point in doing that. I'm just going to, drain my energy. So much of what I've been doing has been listening to see where people need support. And if you can have your finger on the pulse and be able to understand that, I think you're going to be in a far stronger position to be able to support. So, I guess going back to your question a bit more directly, I personally believe for L&D teams, they've got this opportunity now to go from content to context, right? Now, this is a bit of a generalism, but I think previously L&D teams have been quite focused on needing to create content and to curate content and be able to be seen as the people who are connecting employees with learning.
Yep.
That's still important, right? It's still vital that you have the right content model in place and structure to support people. But more and more, and you hear these terms, learning culture, and things like that. Learning culture isn't just about the learning that's available and the badges that you get for it. Learning has a whole ecosystem around. You need to feel that you're motivated to learn, right? You can have all the ability in the world, but if you don't feel motivated, you won't apply it. So you need to feel motivated. You need to feel recognized, rewarded, all of those great things. And I think L&D have got a really huge opportunity now to be able to start thinking about, how do we make this thing live for our employees? How do we put a narrative in place that really makes them feel encouraged, empowered, and engaged to learn? Now, when I say, content doesn't go away by any stretch, but I think, again, we shouldn't look to do these things on our own, right? So there are some great companies that are out there that do development of content. There's some great companies out there, and OfCourseMe are leading the way for me in terms of the curation. So embrace those partnerships. We're not going to go through this journey on our own, and we'll be stronger for the collective that we build on it. So I think the first thing for me is building those partnerships for L&D teams. So go out and recognize who are the people who are going to help you through this and make those strong, lasting relationships. And then the other element is, if you're going to become this valued business partner, you need to be asking the right questions, right? You need to be sitting with your leadership team and saying, what is the problem? Why are you trying to do this? What behavior you're looking to change? How are you going to measure it? It's those kind of questions that actually then, and it might take several iterations of it because you're not going to get the right answer the first time around.
Yeah, of course.
But by having the capability to ask those questions, and it's not as simple as just asking the question. There's a whole behavior behind it in terms of knowing how to listen, how to challenge, knowing how to respond. And I think one of the most powerful things is being able to then simplify what you hear. because by doing that, you're starting to take some of the complexity out of the situation, and then you can move into creative strategic thinking that moves it forward. So core capabilities, I think that L&D should be developing now in order to move into this valued strategic partnership.
Okay.
And, you know, from my point, to just answer your last question, Adam, from my point, you know, that's what I've built this business model around now, is just being in a position through all the experience I've got with Mars, with Vodafone, in being able to support businesses in doing that. So, you know, I'm offering up discovery calls, 40-minute free discovery calls for anyone who's interested in exploring whether this is a kind of partnership that would work for them. And a shameless plug, I've got my email address on there, so you know, there's certainly an area I see that I can help people.
No, most definitely. Like you say, we continue in partnerships, right, because of the success of the back of Vodafone as well. So I think it goes without saying how important those are. And yeah, it sounds like you're going to be providing really valuable stuff through your partnership as well, Nick. So for me then, in summary, some of the key L&D challenges that are going to be approaching in sort of next year, 18 months. How would you capture that?
So I guess in summary, you know, and again, there's a little bit of repetition and reinforcement in these messages, but I think the first step for L&D is to just take a step back and just think about, do they need to repurpose their strategy based on this opportunity that they've got now? You know, traditionally, and I've felt this pain a number of times when I've been in L&D teams, that the questions keep coming up of, you know, how do you explain your return on investment? Right? How do you put a value on that? How do you ensure that the metrics you're providing demonstrate a shift in business performance, right? And they're not just a set of metrics that say, we've managed to get 90,000 people through some training, aren't we good? Yeah. So that you know, those kind of conversations are tiring, because you're always almost trying to justify your existence, and then regardless of how well you do that, when it comes to budget cuts, L&D is quite often the luxury item that gets chopped from the bottom line. So that's why I think this is a huge opportunity that L&D should embrace. So that's my first one, is, you know, it's just think about your strategy in that respect. Second one is build a skilled L&D organization around that. So the skills and the balance of skills and the responsibilities that we had before might not be as relevant, you know, moving forward in the next 12 to 18 months. So do you need to develop new capabilities in your existing employees, or do you have to think about how you're going to organize that moving forward? Again, this is so repetition, I know, Adam, and but build lasting strategic external partnerships. They are so important. Implement an agile skills framework. So this skills framework topic hasn't gone away. It's still one of the most important things that we should be thinking about. Right? I honestly believe that companies almost have a corporate responsibility to be reskilling people rather than trying to just acquire and buy in new skills whenever they're needed. And therefore, to do that, you need to have a solid framework in place to do it. People need to understand what skills they should be focusing on today, what skills might be relevant for their career progression moving forward, and that they have got the ability to be able to acquire those skills through learning content and through learning through others. So, you know, the next point I've got on there is connect people to people. And I think this is a new shift for L&D as well. So the traditional model has always been around connecting people to content. And let's continue to do that. Let's make sure that the content is high quality and that it's got the narrative and the context behind it. But also, let's start to think about who are the people in the business who really have got the skills, can demonstrate the skills, can articulate those skills. And let's connect them up with people, because mentoring is a very, very strong way of helping people learn. And it's not something that is happening naturally. I don't think companies give people, experts, whatever you want to call them, enough space to be able to think about developing other people. And that's something that I really would like to see change. And then the last point is just, again, overarching the whole thing, Adam, is I think L&D now is in a perfect position to start providing that context and narrative to enable, encourage, empower, whatever the word needs to be, personal development, and let that thrive. And then hopefully you start to see some of the elements of this learning culture come to life.
Brilliant.
And I guess looking at those, because these are all challenges for L&D across the board, but we keep talking about this partnership word, Adam. And I guess, the question for you would be, looking at these, where do you think OfCourseMe are best positioned now to be able to respond to some of these as well?
So what we're doing at OfCourseMe, and I know you've seen some of this, Nick, as well, is we're really looking to just bridge the gap. So at the minute, we're being as responsive as possible, right, to supplement any reskilling or upskilling that's needed. We've expanded our library by, I think, over 100,000 content pieces within the last 3-4 months, across multiple languages. I think we're over 20 now as well. So always looking to expand that, with the comfort being that the content's always dynamic, so it's relevant, and yeah, it's quality assured, as you would have seen at Vodafone as well. Second point, a really important point for me as well, Nick, is we're investing a lot into what we're calling playlists. So this is the curation part, basically, and that's all around very relevant topics. So we would have a playlist, for example, which might be 20 pieces of content, and that could be on health and well-being. Could have a playlist on which is 10 content pieces long on leadership training. Remote working's a big deal at the moment, and these are playlists that are readily available at launch, so you can add that straight away to your learners' libraries, and you've got content there. You're not investing time in researching all of this. You're not having to build this internally, etc. We want to give you something straight away, effectively. And then lastly, which is really important to note as well, is the speed to launch. So whether it's integrating with existing platforms, whether you're coming to us and you're looking for a platform to sit by itself, we understand the pressure that L&D is under at the moment. I most definitely do with all my conversations. So we are putting ourselves to the limit to, like I say, to launch to our clients as quickly as we can, Nick. So I know from the NMS side, I know from lots of product launch sides how long this can be, especially in this industry. And yeah, that's something that we're really putting ourselves under pressure for, so we can alleviate that pressure from others. So they're the three, I say, key points that we're working on at the moment. I suppose it's a good time to pick up any questions. I can see we got 2 questions here as well, Nick.
Just before you mentioned those, just to respond to what you were saying, I think that's spot on, right? One of the things I really think is happening now is that external content is being seen as more and more valuable for companies. In the past, it used to be something that everything was on the bespoke internal.
Yep.
And now external can play a huge role in helping people with acquiring the skills they need. I love the concept of playlists. That's so simple with what I do with Spotify and everything else. I think we talk about groups of learning or programs or something internally, and to be able to then pick a playlist that had a selection of quality content for a certain subject, that's a really great feature, I think. And
yeah,
and the speed to market, again, speaking from the experience with the work we did with you guys, it's so important, because once you get multiple teams involved in doing these integrations, it can take so long to achieve it. But I think the fact that you can make these things happen quickly is, it's hugely valuable.
Thanks. And to echo what you said earlier, and it goes without saying really, but this isn't just ideas that we necessarily have thought of internally. This is us listening to what people need currently and responding to that as quickly as we can. And yeah, it's healthy to see. It's good to see it being taken on board, Nick. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. Is there, well, if you're happy for me to, shall I read these out, these questions, which are actually targeted to you, Nick? Excellent. So from anonymous attendee, question 1. For Nick, lessons learned in setting up a successful partnership in L&D, or better, what are the hurdles, pain points in setting up a successful partnership? Is there a checklist, framework?
Yeah, I mean, great question, and I'll give you a quick response sort of from the top of my head now, and also I'm happy if you want to sort of set up a short call afterwards to discuss this in more detail. But I think the key thing for me is being recognised as that valued partner. So it's being able to have a strong seat at the table when some of the strategic discussions are taking place. And part of that for me is identifying who are the critical stakeholders that you need to be working with. Because if you can get conversations going with those stakeholders, you can then start to understand what's driving them, what's keeping them awake, what are their goals and ambitions at the moment. And by understanding that more, you can start talking in a language that is far more strategic rather than an agenda that's a little bit more driven by the L&D world, if that makes sense. And I think the other tip I'd give at this stage is people start thinking about learning and skills as a little bit of a silo, whereas learning is only a small part of the skills solution, because it's also talent, it's also resourcing, it's also the people development side of things. So that needs to be joined up as well, and to have conversations that talk about skills almost as a backbone that helps all of those HR functions becomes a very powerful way of being able to demonstrate a strategic conversation across the broader organization. But as I say, if that's something you'd be interested, I'm not sure who anonymous attendee is, but if that's something that you'd be interested in having a more detailed conversation, then feel free to send me an email.
Brilliant. We've got a question too as well from anonymous, and it's for both of us. Isn't there a risk of losing control over the key L&D processes by outsourcing activities to a partner? Make versus buy is often a tricky decision. Do you want to have a stab at that one first, Nick?
Yeah, and it is, right. So it's understanding, and I think this is where I talk about context and narrative, because it's context and narrative, and if you want, that talks a little bit to process. So what is it that's on your learning roadmap that is absolutely critical to be delivering, and how do you partner with the business to do it? And then from that, it's making some decisions in terms of what are the critical elements that internally we should be involved in, and where can we start to reach out externally to people to partner with us to do it. But what that's not doing is opening up the whole operation externally and saying, right, you guys strategically drive this forward from here, because that's where you are at risk of losing control over it. So I think a roadmap, a very clear roadmap, and a narrative supporting that, understanding your internal processes, and then picking the areas that you think this is where we can get some really good traction with external providers to help us.
Yeah, I think I can't honestly add too much to that. As a supplier or we was to you, Nick, anyway, at Vodafone as well. Yeah, I completely understand. I'm always in discussions of what people can, budgets, what do they extend to, team sizes as well. So I think there's a lot of factors as well from the company on whether they can achieve great things internally, or if they do need to lean on a partnership really for that. So for me, it's quite broad. I think there's lots of discussion and lots of points to pick apart there to see what works best for you, most definitely. Sorry if that's a bit of a cheap answer there, but I truly believe that it's quite a discussion to get down to the core of that. We've got another question, Nick, from Raymond here as well, is what is your advice for moving digital, and how can your partnership support organizations?
I might ask, hi Raymond, by the way, I might ask if you don't mind to just expand on what you mean by moving digital, because I don't know whether you're implying that moving your content into the digital world, or whether you're meaning moving your skills into the digital world. So if you can just expand on that a bit. Combination of both. Okay, cool. So if I talk about content first, then moving everything to a virtual digital world is, it's it's moving the needle too far the other way in my mind. There's such value in having interactive, face-to-face, live conversations and experiences. So I think the future is to have really powerful learning journeys, right? And those learning journeys will be a mix of some synchronous, some asynchronous content, but live events where people are getting together and talking about the kind of things that they're doing and the challenges they're facing and how they're moving into them. So I don't think everything's going to rush off and be created in e-learning. I think it does have to be a balance. That balance will take time to settle down. But I think one of the things you will see is the content developers and the partners there of the future will be the ones that can build these really great, impactful learning journeys, virtual learning journeys, as opposed to just single bits of content or single programs. In terms of the organization, Raymond, then I think the first thing to do is to understand what digital skills are critical for the business. Right? And I know, if I think back to my days at Vodafone, this was a really big piece of work that they worked with a couple of external companies in order to look at the digital skills that were out there and whether some of those come into this agile methodology world, and really understand what do they need, what skills does the business need, and then to do an audit to say what skills have we got. And that then led to, so if we think about this whole partnership approach again, by L&D partnering with the business to understand what that gap was, then the interventions and the programs that were being developed and the content was all being pulled together to address those gaps. But that was the biggest problem at that stage for the business. They were concerned that they didn't have the skill set in those areas. So the key thing, first of all, I think, is to understand what critical skills do you need, and then to do an audit against what you've got. And at that point, you're in a good position to be able to evaluate that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm going to assume there's no more questions, guys. If there is, do feel free to reach out afterwards. Most definitely, Nick and myself can follow up. I know we've just hit the sort of 40-minute mark. Is there anything else, Nick, that you want to add to this before we finish?
No, I just think to reiterate a couple of the points, Adam, in terms of, we've overused this word partnership, if you can overuse it. But to me, this is a fresh start in some respects, and an opportunity for things to be done slightly differently. They don't always come along like this. You have to work hard sometimes to make change happen. It feels this time like there's a bit of a wave that we can ride to be able to put some of this through. So my advice would be, to start thinking about what do we need to do, who do we need to talk to, who are the key people in the business that we need to start having these conversations with, and how do we build the capability to be able to have the right conversations and be able to interpret those conversations and turn that into a roadmap. And amongst all of that, going back to this point of really think about where you can partner with others so that you can really focus on doing those critical roles for the business. The more you dilute things, the less chance you've got to really be impactful in that area. So again, that's where I just stress, look for the best partners to support you on the journey. Brilliant.
Perfect. Well, Nick, as always, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for giving, very insightful answers, I'm sure, for everyone there. Guys, again, this is being recorded, so I can send this on to you. I just want to say a quick thank you for everyone joining. This is the first webinar of hopefully many. We will definitely be mixing up the topics going forward. And yeah, if there's anything of interest, you want to reach out, even if it's just discussion around what's happening in the industry, what we're hearing, you know, both Nick and myself are always open to that. So yeah, please do feel free to get in touch, and yeah, stay safe, everyone. Thank you.